It's finally happening. The Xbox Series X is launching today. I can't wait to get my hands on one. I really tried to get one so I could review it on this channel for all of you amazing people, but the great 2020 shortages are extending the grasp to everything from toilet paper to even consoles. So today, instead of looking towards the future, let's look towards the past and press F to pay respects to the Xbox One. A controversial, very low selling but still lovable console that today is being made obsolete. It had a very interesting ride, and it also provides a lot of very interesting lessons. So join me as we look back at the Xbox One. But before we can talk about the 8th generation, let's travel back in time even further. Back to the 7th generation, where the Xbox 360 was riding high. It's a console that was really loved for its great hardware, great assortment of games, great everything. And even though it was technically the worst selling console of the generation, it still touched a lot of people, and it definitely left great expectations behind. The 360 did a lot right and innovated in just the right ways over the original Xbox. The game lineup improved, the new controller became absolutely legendary, and it's still to this day a very decent controller. And it had all these nice and weird traditions like the Xbox Live Arcade and Xbox Live Summer Arcade, stuff like that. It was all just so nice and wholesome, and many people still so fondly remember all these little touches that made the Xbox 360 special. Sure, maybe it's just nostalgia for a much nicer time when consoles weren't as barren and all sense hasn't left the earth. But still, nonetheless, they were very popular and influential features. And of course, there's also the Kinect. Now, true, it may have just been riding up the motion controls train that Nintendo was spearheading at that time thanks to the massive success of the Wii, but the Kinect still made some decent sales and also created some great memories for so many people. So it was still a win for the 360, even though it was still, just a motion controls gimmick. And it was still, very early motion controls when the technology wasn't quite at a good enough level. But still, despite that, it still sold rather well. And the success of the Xbox 360 was also due to the fact that it was just an absolute great all-rounder console. While the PS3 was more niche, and also, by the way, Sony gave Microsoft a huge advantage right at the bat, because when the PS3 launched, it was extremely expensive, and the Nintendo Wii was just in a completely different category on its own because of its insanely high sales and the fact it was so different and more casual than the Xbox and the PS3. Well, the Xbox 360 was just an absolutely lovely, huggable all-rounder. Like, if this thing was a dog, it would be a golden retriever, no doubt. So after the big friendly giant that was the 360 graced the earth, people had high expectations for its successor. And the first thing we quickly learned is that Microsoft really isn't that great at marketing, because they decided to call a brand new console the Xbox One. Not a name that makes sense, like say Xbox 720 or pretty much anything other than just one. I guess it was a trend at a time, when so many games were ditching normal numerical sequelage and instead going with either a completely unrelated name with no number, or if they really want to confuse people, just have the name have no subtitle or number at all. So just the same name as the original game, because why not? And what also became more and more apparent is that Microsoft was getting desperate. The confidence they saw with the 360 was quickly fading away, as even months before the launch of the Xbox One, they weren't fully sure what on earth they were doing with this thing. Like, for example, would pre-owned games work on it? If you put a pre-owned game into your Xbox One, will it work just fine, or will it call the FBI? What are the Kinect? Will it be always on and always watching you? And speaking of always on, what are the internet connection? They couldn't even decide whether or not it would need a constant internet connection or not. Then they said that it would work if it has an internet connection like once a day or whatever. They just really couldn't decide what direction they wanted to take the console. While the PS4 was just confidently waiting to launch, and then the launch days came. The Xbox One sold pretty poorly and amassed quite a bit of hate for its various always-on features and weird interfaces and lack of general user-friendliness, while the PS4 completely destroyed its competition and merrily continued to sell million after million after million. So what exactly went wrong? They had a solid amount of launch games and soon to launch games. The hardware was much better, the Kinect was back and better than ever before. So what could go wrong? Not only was Microsoft still unsure how to tackle so many of the previously mentioned issues like, say, always on connection and how pre-owned games work, etc, an overall lack of innovation over the Xbox 360 made many people not bother. And yes, that is kind of the case for many consoles at the start. Many people don't want to upgrade straight away because all their favorite games are still on the previous console. And the Xbox One and PS4 have both had notoriously bad backwards compatibility, almost non-existent. Then a few years have passed and things just didn't improve. While the PS4 was still selling like hotcakes, Xbox, on the other hand, decided to take some more desperate measures, like completely axing the Kinect. Mostly it's because, well, people kind of got over the whole gimmick of motion controls. Now, and I even hate to use the word gimmick because it was a truly innovative thing that could have led to some amazing gameplay, but people were getting tired of it, not enough games were being released, so more people were getting tired of it because there was nothing to play, and the cycle continued and continued, until it reached a point that pretty much the only friend that the Kinect department could really count on is Ubisoft's Just Dance team. Xbox then tried to change things up once again in 2016 and trying to make the Xbox relevant again and make it appear in a few more headlines by releasing the Xbox One S, the console which at the time was rewarded the title of the most confusing console name of all time, now given to the Xbox Series X and Series S instead. And then a year later they released the Xbox One X just to add to the whole confusion and just leading to that dreaded scenario of your grandma mishearing what you want, and instead of buying you a One X she buys you a One S because it all sounds the same. Like, Microsoft, what on earth are you doing? Just please hire someone else to name your console for you, please. So did those two refreshes breathe any new life into the Xbox One? Not really. First, there's the Xbox One S, this thing right here, and what was my personal Xbox for this generation. Pretty much the only difference over the normal Xbox One was 4K support. Apart from, like, you know, slightly optimized hardware to also actually play well at 4K, that was pretty much all it offered. It did bring the Xbox back into the headlines for a while, but it didn't really achieve much, and it was kind of just stuck there in that weird middle area, especially since at the same time as this was being released, Microsoft already started to tease the Xbox One X, codenamed Project Scorpio at the time. Then a year later, the Xbox One X finally launched, which at least had a few more improvements over the original console, unlike the Xbox One S over here. And it was at the time the most powerful console to date, not just the most powerful Xbox, but the most powerful console, allowing for some absolutely breathtaking visuals, and at least it did stir a bit more interest than the One S. Though hardware improvements aside, it simply didn't do enough differently to warrant the purchase for a lot of people, especially since at that time, people were starting to prepare for the 9th generation of consoles. Because remember, this has been an overall pretty long generation, so people are just trying to expect that the next Xbox and the next PlayStation will be around the corner. Then of course, Sony released a PlayStation 4 Pro as a competitor to the Xbox One X, creating this weird 8.5 generation, I guess you could call it, and even though it was weaker than the Xbox One X, for many people it simply was the better value, thanks to the huge amount of games that were on offer, and also a lot of games that Sony took hostage. I mean games that were exclusive to the PlayStation 4. Not only that, but 2017 was also the year when the Empire struck back, and Nintendo finally released their Nintendo Switch, which offered a completely different experience to both the PlayStation 4 and the Xbox One. And many people who were looking for an absolutely unique, incredible gaming experience simply turned to Nintendo and used their console allowance to get themselves a Switch instead. So Microsoft's attempt to recapture the spotlight with these two refreshes didn't really work. And with a new great competitor on the market, it seemed harder than ever to gain a good foothold for them. So they decided to move to some more drastic steps. And so from that desperation came the Xbox Game Pass, a subscription service from Microsoft, because it was a time when those kind of services were becoming more and more commonplace, and it was basically just a monthly subscription you would pay and you would receive access to a huge amount of games for your Xbox One. Sounds pretty great, right? Well, true, but at the start it didn't really get too much of a following simply because there weren't enough great games on it. Then Microsoft decided to get even more risky by introducing Xbox All Access, which allowed you to get Xbox Game Pass and the Xbox One for something like what, $20, $25 a month? Which is an absolutely fantastic deal, but the lack of marketing around it and the fact that the Xbox Game Pass was still kind of lackluster didn't really make it that great of a selling point. Then Microsoft started doing even more drastic things like introducing backwards compatibility. I know, what a novel idea. They started porting over 360 and original Xbox games to the Xbox One to try and get that old crowd over, and all those people who loved the original Xbox and the 360 but just didn't stick around. And when that wasn't enough, throughout 2018 and 2019, Microsoft decided to go all out on the Xbox Game Pass to make it an absolutely incredible deal. Firstly, they introduced Xbox Game Pass for PC, which, seeing how so many games were available on both Xbox and PC, even quote-unquote Xbox exclusives, it just made sense. And seeing how they're really trying to nurture this Xbox and PC ecosystem through different applications and even through doing stuff like allowing the use of a mouse and keyboard on your Xbox, well, it just made sense. But then they also introduced Xbox Game Pass Ultimate, which at around just $10 a month would give you access to Xbox Game Pass for consoles, Xbox Game Pass for PC, Xbox Live, and also tons of other perks that will come in the future. And that is when things really started to take off. The library of Xbox Game Pass games absolutely exploded on both consoles and on PC, and the value of this package grew immensely month by month. Soon other benefits were added, like say free Discord Nitro for a few months, free Spotify Premium for a few months, and of course a few months ago they also added xCloud as part of Xbox Game Pass Ultimate, which allows you to play console grade games right on your Android phone, because Apple wouldn't welcome Microsoft even if their life depended on it. So the Xbox Game Pass was absolutely amazing. However, sadly, at a point it simply wasn't enough to save the Xbox One, and its sales didn't really take off as much, especially since Project Scarlet, which we now know as the Xbox Series X, was also starting to get teased by them. However, that last hurrah of the Xbox One may actually be its greatest strength and greatest legacy, because would the Xbox Game Pass be such an amazing deal if not for the struggles of the Xbox One? Probably not. They probably wouldn't have made it so competitive if the Xbox One was selling at the same rate as the PS4. But since it wasn't, they had to take more drastic steps, and maybe it hasn't paid off now, but in preparation for the Xbox Series X and Xbox Series S, of course, it may have gave the groundwork for something absolutely incredible. Xbox All Access in particular is another big one. Seeing how you can get yourself an Xbox Series X for $35 a month for 24 months, and that's with Xbox Game Pass Ultimate, well, that is such an amazing deal that, well, I don't think would have existed if not for the pressure that was exerted upon them by PlayStation, both last gen and this gen. So no, the Xbox One wasn't terrible or anything, it was absolutely great. And sure, maybe the refreshes like this Xbox One S were kind of laughable, but it was still a great console. And it did a lot of things right as well. And sure, maybe I haven't used it too much myself because, well, I've gotten an absolutely amazing gaming PC that kind of made this thing a tad obsolete, but I still definitely loved my time with it, and I'll definitely continue to love it because it was still a great console, and I can't wait to play on it a bit more. So that was just a quick look back at the Xbox One. Let me know what you think of it, let me know what kind of memories you have with it, and also hey, while you're here, maybe check out my Patreon, it's going to be down in the video description below. Even $1 a month goes a long way helping my channel, and also I'd like to thank my Patreons Gavin Burns and LKB, thank you ever so much. Then there's also a link to my Discord if you can talk to me about this or whatever else really, and then there's also Amazon links if you want to buy anything from Amazon, you don't pay anything extra, we get sending money, it's a win-win. So I guess that's really it, so I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, remember to subscribe, like, whatever, and I'll see you all in whatever I make next. Goodbye everyone, goodbye. And I wish you all a happy 9th generation of consoles.